Hi, thank you for clicking on this video. This is my first time uploading anything to YouTube, and I am very elementary with video editing and recording in any sort of fashion, as is evident by the fact that I am using PowerPoint as a slideshow in order to do any sort of transitions between the points and to bring up images. Though I am an amateur and admittedly more a novice when it comes to this sort of thing, something I am not a novice at is economics and history, which is why I've decided to start this YouTube channel, Uncomfortable History, by dispelling Economics Explained's video with history and economics combined. The video in question is recently uploaded to the actual point at which I am going to be uploading this video itself. And with that, let's start on with the video. So, very recently to this video's publication, a channel by the name of Economics Explained, one where, in many cases, from people I've heard critiquing the channel, it is being ran by an undergraduate in economics in an Australian university, has the express purpose as a channel of making the field of economics more accessible to those who may be daunted by the field itself. The thing that he did not realize, though, is his recent video, Why Are Cold Countries Richer Than Hot Countries?, is a video that perpetuates a harmful stereotype in a field dominated by white men and societies that have benefited off of colonization directly. If that is a statement that makes you feel uncomfortable, then you probably don't know your full history, and I implore you to stick around and listen to the historical context on uncomfortable history. Full disclosure before we get started, though, I did at one point apply for a job at Economics Explained, but I do not hold my rejection against the staff, as I've been rejected by many employers during quarantine. What I cannot tolerate, though, is a bad use of statistics, ignoring geopolitics as an externality on economic growth, and other factors such as colonialism playing a role in a country's economic development. With that, let's get into the meat of the video. The first statement that he makes is very uncontroversial. Most people, when thinking of advanced economies, think of Western Europe, North America, and the continent of Oceania, which includes Australia and New Zealand. But this is not where I want to place my focus. My issue begins with this map, but it's not because of the map. As seen on screen, this map lists nominal GDP per capita using color-coded countries, where green is the more economically developed and red is the less economically developed. This is the exact same map that Economics Explained uses in his video, except he changes the background to be black and eliminates the chart at the bottom that explains what the ranges are for these color-coded figures. This is where I will diverge from him in many ways, because I will show the full context of the data I present. Though not controversial, again, as a map, Economics Explained plows to the premise of the video. The countries that are more developed are in colder climatary regions, while those that are less developed are in warmer climatary regions. Notice how he never mentions Russia, historically one of the most frigid countries with a reputation for freezing the armies of both Napoleon and the Nazis in their tracks through the cold Russian winter. And yet it has a GDP per capita between $10,000 to $20,000 US on nominal terms per person per year. This is not excluding wealth disparities, and it is not factoring in median income. It is only GDP per capita as calculated by statistical average, which has its own problems in its own right, but that is a digression that is going to have to wait for another time, because otherwise this will be an hour-long video. Another region I want to point to is Brazil and the Dominican Republic, because these two countries are vastly dominated by tropical jungle climates around the same line of latitude with vastly different nominal GDPs per capita due to, wait for it, externalities and other factors that are not included in a simple regression of data that involves nothing but climate and economic data. A starker example of this disparity and how it does not fit with two countries that are on the same hemisphere, with the same climate, with the same landmass, is the island of Hispaniola, with the two countries that occupy it being Haiti and the Dominican Republic. I have pointed it out on the map here so you can see that Haiti has a GDP per capita in nominal terms less than $1,000 US, while the Dominican Republic is in either the ballpark of 5,000 to 10,000 or 10,000 to 20,000. Frankly, it is a little tiny on the map and hard to tell which. With that, this is a close-up on the country, or the countries in question, the Dominican Republic with its capital of Santo Domingo, and Haiti with its capital of Port-au-Prince. Now, these two island nations have a shared climate, a shared history as colonies of major European powers, and a shared barrage of hurricanes every year, and yet their economies are two worlds apart. Why is this? Slavery, colonization, and trade embargoes. Since the arrival of Columbus on Hispaniola, the island has been, or had been for a while, a center of early Spanish imperial rule in the Western Hemisphere. This is until it lost prominence to the resource-rich continent full of gold, silver, and other exploitable resources. This would remain the balance of power, with Santo Domingo becoming a major trading port rather than, or a major port for refueling before going across the Atlantic, until 1625, when the French took what is now Haiti and established their own colony called Saint-Dominique. The French ruled this colony with exceptional brutality over an enslaved population that outnumbered the colonists 10 to 1. This would end in 1804 after Haiti fought a revolutionary war against France, killed their colonial masters, and established their own country. Though admittedly turbulent, Haiti's predicament was made worse by France demanding reparations and the U.S., my home country, not recognizing or trading with Haiti for fear of their own slave rebellion. It would not be until 1861 when the U.S. would recognize Haiti as a country. This was also the year when the Civil War started, which was fought over slavery. All of these external effects hampered economic development on the side of the island, with many natural harbors, a perfect climate for sugarcane production, and being the first country that liberated itself from slavery, a proud history. For those new to economics, externalities are issues that face an economy that are not explained by fundamental principles, such as Keynesian theories or Pareto efficiency, but instead explained by something outside of a country's economy, having a direct effect on a country's ability to follow these economic principles, such as geopolitical positioning, the history of said country and its relationship to other countries, and geography itself. The Dominican Republic, conversely, is a nation that followed the classic Latin American decolonization story, with an uncomfortable element added in that still affects the economy of Haiti. Though before we get to that, the image here is the battle for Palm Tree Hill, where, as you see, the recently self-liberated people of Haiti are fighting against Napoleon's French army. Now going back to the Dominican Republic, though, Trujillo, who used anti-Haitian sentiment as a xenophobic tactic to maintain power. He was the dictator of the Dominican Republic from 1930 to 1961, in which, during his time, besides his xenophobia against Haitians and anybody who was black, he also made people disappear. And why did they disappear, you may ask? It is because they were not allegiant to the party, or they were outright against his political rule as a single-party dictator. This racism still exists in the Dominican Republic, with those who are black treated with extreme prejudice, even if they are not Haitian themselves. Linked right now on screen is Vox's Borders series, Divided Island, how Haiti and the Dominican Republic became two worlds. I highly suggest you give it a watch, as the Borders series itself is amazing, and this video specifically explains the disparity far better than I can in a video that is supposed to be about economics and history. And I would suggest you give it a watch. If you cannot, I know you cannot click the link on the screen, so the link will be available in the description if you do not want to type this all out in your Google search bar. I mentioned the example of Haiti and the Dominican Republic by name because something bright-eyed economics students often fall into the trap of is looking at the world with objective lenses. This often means well-intentioned students of economics who may end up making financial and macroeconomic decisions on a national scale look not at the history of why some place ended up in a worse economic situation, but instead try to shoehorn Keynes or Pareto principles where the theories presented by those two schools of thought do not fit to the reality on the ground. Fortunately for you, dear viewer, I graduated with a double major in economic theory as well as history, so I'm well versed in how to apply both economic theory and historical analysis when situations dictate I do one or the other, and combining them when, in the case of this video, it is necessary for understanding the full economic context. Though, to be honest, without such a full economic context, you end up with poor economic figures and data. Speaking of which, let's talk about R-squared, linear regression, and why Economics Explained is incorrectly using simple linear regression. For those not versed in economist jargon, simple linear regression is the idea that when compiling data, certain points appear to fit in a line on a graph when charted individually. This can be used with some pretty complex statistics that Economics Explained attempts to downplay to calculate a line that best fits the data, or a line of best fit. This sort of math works best when dealing with test scores in a classroom compared to time one studies, or the value of a diamond ring when a carat of the central diamond is increased. Economics Explained is not using this alone, but instead using linear regression with ordinary least squares, which is when one attempts to minimize error by calculating how the distance between the points varies to the line of regression. This is why R-squared is even brought up in the first place. Economics Explained, though, takes some liberties with this, and it only takes a Wikipedia search on the caveats associated with R-squared to realize that the entire video is discredited before it even begins. The first and most obvious point in this image, which is taken directly from the Wikipedia page on ordinary least squares, is to realize that the R-squared cannot determine whether the independent variables are a cause of the change in the dependent variable. We have already discussed at length the second point listed, the omitted variable bias, but the first point is important to remember as Economics Explained tries to use the R-squared value that was gained in his statistical analysis to make a correlation where there is no strong evidence of such. Again, though, on to point number 2, omitted variable bias cannot be indicated by R-squared. So even if Economics Explained was well-intentioned and used R-squared as a means to try and detect whether or not he missed something in his calculation, R-squared cannot determine that. Nor can it determine if linear regression was the correct form to be used, or whether multivariate regression, which would have more data than just climate and economic development, and would probably include a factor such as past colonial experience, credit score, political stability, and recent regime change, in order to create a more accurate model. By excluding variables, though, the data still would not predict a corollary because of outliers, which to run a simple linear regression there must be no major outliers. Such outliers, such as Singapore, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, Russia, North Korea, and most of the Balkan states, make the data appear misleading and can lead to some catastrophic assumptions, like the assumption that climate is directly correlated with economic development. Him and his team also violate another fundamental principle, that is, the data are independently and identically distributed. I used Haiti and the Dominican Republic as my focus because the countries are similar. Both were colonies of major European powers. Both share the same island with a similar climate. Both had human traffickers import people as property to work in brutal conditions. Even this is still not a good example for economic data, though, because both countries have had interactions with powers outside their island as well as amongst each other, as has every nation on the planet. With data that is not independent, simple linear regression is not even the right metric to be used here, and instead a multivariable regression that can account for these statistical differences and does not rely on IID should be used in its place. IID, by the way, is the shorthand for independent and identically distributed. Indeed, without access to the specific math that Economics Explained used, and his calculations more than the conclusions, I cannot even verify that Economics Explains upheld the principle that the error term must have a conditional mean of 0, which is known as the least squares assumption, though based on the video, I can make the assumption that it has not been done. Least squares assumptions are done to weed out bad data. It states that the mean of the error term is 0 when compared to the data entered in a set, or at least close enough to 0 to determine externalities are not the cause of such a correlation. Wouldn't that have been helpful? In plain English, this means assuming simple linear regression is even the right metric to be using. The data are independent and identically distributed, and the conditional mean is 0 for the data set. A higher R-squared value means that there is a greater chance that the thing you're looking at is directly causing what is being observed, while a low R-squared value of, let's say off the top of my head, 0.09 indicates that the relationship between the dependent and independent variable cannot be accurately predicted by the regression to determine future results. No conclusive studies have been done on the correlation between hot and cold climates being a principal factor in economic development, because any well-trained economist can see a dismally low R-squared and recognize any correlation is not a substantial factor in determining a country's wealth, and that other factors such as political instability, colonial past, and the ability for a government to borrow money are far greater determiners of strong GDP figures and economic growth. Most calculations of the sort are multivariable and factor in the factors stated above, as well as disease, stability, and geography into their calculations. To explain this graph here. This is Occam's law. This is an example of when linear regression is used. The quarterly change in GDP increases as the quarterly change in unemployment decreases, and vice versa. This has been done and can be substantially proven in some cases by real-world examples where when people are working, they often have a higher output and total in the country, though this is not always the case. Going back to the topic at hand, though, there are other problems with this video, such as its callous perpetuation of Montesquieu's theory of climate and human development, where you can pause to read the blurb on the screen, but a link to the full text will be below. This is not a theory I agree with, but it is a theory that Economics Explains is deriving his rant at the end from. Knowing or unknowingly, he is perpetuating Montesquieu's climate and geography from the spirit of the laws. The channel also blatantly disregards history before 1950, and it neglects the fact that in my country, the United States, the fastest growing cities are in the American South, the American West, and the American Southwest, with Phoenix, Arizona, a country that regularly sees highs of 120 degrees in the summer, as one of the top growing cities in the country as far as population and economic development. In fact, Australia's correlation between its largest cities existing in the southeast of the country is better explained by geopolitics and history than by economics. In fact, as evidenced by the map on the screen right now, Melbourne and Sydney, the two largest cities referenced in the video itself, are situated between Canberra, the capital of Australia. This city was placed as a planned city, as was Washington, D.C., between two major political centers and economic centers that existed far before the country discovered its vast resources in the Australian outback. And it is perpetuated by the idea that if a major company wants to be within range of lobbying the Australian government for better tax incentives or a favorable bill, they need to be situated close to Canberra in order for their lobbyists and representatives to actually visit the capital and speak to legislatures. This is in part because the penal colony of Australia was founded before air conditioning itself as well. So people who didn't want to sweat all summer settled where it was cooler relative to the rest of the continent. This is why Phoenix is now developing into a larger city than it was before, while New York City had a long history of being the economic center of the United States. It is because people generally are more comfortable when the temperature is a little bit cooler, hence why air conditioning exists. Another myth that I want to dispel that economics explained liked to espouse quite readily was that countries in what is regarded as the global south have it easier. This is not the case, and it takes opening a history book about your Aboriginal people within Australia, as well as the British Empire and other European empires' general colonization efforts, that prove this point quite handily wrong. The perpetuation of that point, in fact, is a Eurocentric whitewashing of history that gets rid of a vast and quite uncomfortable history of colonization, exploitation, and subjugation. It also avoids the more cheery parts of history. After all, where Singapore is today has always been a geopolitically significant location, as it's on a vital trading node to the regional economy and the global economy, and that area of the world would see traders from China to Zanzibar. That is a video all on its own. If I get any actual money for this video, I will do a full overview of the theory of climate and why certain nations developed the way they did from a climate and geography perspective with respect to history as it currently stands. Though, to give a shorthand through a metaphor, Sid Meier's Civilization is often regarded as a game that emulates the progression of a civilization throughout history. So, think for a moment you are starting your first city with your first settler. How your surrounding production, your surrounding resources, and the proximity to either the coast or navigable river affect how you play the game quite a bit. And the same is true of human beings in real life, though that is way oversimplified and there are their own problems with that game itself. The claim that Economics Explained also liked to make was that warfare is more common among people in warmer climates because heat makes aggression and cold makes passivity. The claim on warfare is very much unfounded, and the image on screen right now is proof of a turbulent period in European history known as the Middle Ages, which historians regard anywhere between the 5th century, wherein the Western Roman Empire fell, to the 14th or 15th century, when the Byzantine Empire finally lost Constantinople. The picture on screen is the Siege of Orleans in France under Joan of Arc, near the end of the Middle Ages. This is juxtaposed with the Baghdad House of Wisdom. This image, or painting, is from 1237 CE, or Common Era, and covers a Renaissance within the Middle East in which there were vast advancements in science, technology, and philosophy. In fact, if you hated algebra as a kid, these are the guys you have to thank for that. Because while Europe was tearing itself apart, they were figuring out what x equaled. In conclusion, though, with a little statistical know-how and a clear understanding of history, I can easily demonstrate try to fit theory to reality, when in fact reality is what constructed theory in the first place. This is not to say the channel is inherently bad. I would not have applied for a job there if it was. But I am not the first, and I expect not the last, to point out the flaws in Economics Explained's attempt to apply economics to reality. I just happen to be the one who approached it from a dual perspective of economics and history. I have been the host of Uncomfortable History. If you'd like me to keep making videos like this, like, comment, subscribe, and share. If you really want me to keep doing this, consider donating to my PayPal link in the description so I can feed myself enough coffee to write 200-word to 2,000-word videos about the uncomfortable side of history that you were likely not taught in elementary, middle, high school, or even college. I can't promise consistent uploads at this time in my life, but I can promise that I'll do my research before I make baseless claims on the internet. With that though, thanks for watching. See you next time.